I'm Joan Griffin, and this is Reading in the Wild with Auburn Community Television. Thank you for watching today, and I've got some wonderful books to share with you today. I am going to be talking about these two books, Before Dorothy by Hazel Gaynor and Unspoken by Jann Alexander. But before I get into that, I want to remind everyone where these books come from. Where do I choose them from? Well, every Earth Month, I put together a curated list of books with Mother Nature as an important part of the plot, important part of the background, maybe even a character. And they're all across genres, and so today I'm bringing you two books from my favorite genre to read, which is historical fiction. These two books are interesting. It's almost like somebody put out a contest and said, here are the things you have to include in the book, and then what can you come up with? Because they're set in approximately the same place, at approximately the same time. The makeup of the families are approximately the same, and the central characters are a young woman and her mother or mother figure. And yet the books are radically different. Why? Because the main characters make different decisions, which changes their destiny, and we see how that works. So, let us start with Unspoken. Unspoken by Jann Alexander has a central figure named Ruby Lee. And the whole story takes place in northern Texas, or on the Texas Panhandle, during the Depression era in the Dust Bowl. The Dust Bowl era has fascinated Americans for decades, and there are lots of storytellers who have taken on the task of telling the story of what exactly happened during that period. So we have novels, and we have movies, and we have photography, we have songs all about that period of time. They're familiar to us. Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, Woody Guthrie's stories, Dorothea Lange's photographs. They're all about that period of time that it's so fascinating. And both of these women have taken that period of time to tell a different story. And Jann Alexander puts us in North Texas with a family on a farm. And the first scene, chapter 1, is on Black Sunday. Black Sunday was the day that the greatest of the horrible dust storms that blew through the countryside, it was that day. The family is at church. They need to drive home, not very far. They're in their Model T. And the storm comes up so quickly and so thickly and so black that it kills people all across the Dust Bowl that year. Cows fell down in the fields. The air was so full of dust they couldn't breathe. That dust storm carried topsoil from the high plains all the way to New York City and Washington, D.C. The story is that Franklin Delano Roosevelt's desk in the Oval Office was covered with the topsoil from the high plains. And it's the storm that got politicians in Washington to go, oh, maybe we need to do something to help those farmers. So that's the first chapter in this book, and Ruby Lee and her mom and dad and the other kids in the family and grandma and the baby are all in the midst of this. It's pretty shocking. It gets your attention. You get to meet these people. They make decisions, though, that create a destiny that's not good. Mom ends up committed to an insane asylum. Ruby has what they call dust pneumonia, which is when your lungs are so full of dust and it scars and tears up your lungs that you can't breathe and is often deadly. They send her to live elsewhere with distant relatives. The baby dies, grandma dies. It's a horrible situation. But Mom and Ruby never give up. They never give up on getting the family together. They never give up on those family bonds, that love. But boy, do they have to jump over hurdles to get back together. The strength of young Ruby Lee, the courage. This author calls this book an adventure. It's not like an adventure like my book where you go off and you go hiking in a mountain. This is an inner adventure and an outer adventure where you have to make decisions in the face of horrible circumstances. It is a beautiful book. I would highly, highly recommend it. Now, I know the author, Jann Alexander, because we share a publisher. Jann lives in Texas and has spent over a decade studying Texas history, which is what fascinated her so with this region. She's also a photographer and a painter, and many of her photographs are of places in Texas that she's visited. And if you go to her website, you can see that array of photographs. Also, on her website, you'll learn that, in fact, Unspoken is celebrating its first birthday this month. And so this is her debut novel, and there's a sequel coming out in a few months called Vacancy. And I'm definitely hooked in, and I've already pre-ordered Vacancy. I can't wait to read it. Now, our second book today, and I think you'll see why I paired them together, is Before Dorothy by Hazel Gaynor. It's set just a few hundred miles away from the Texas Panhandle in western Kansas. It's set on a farm in the 30s. There's a family. The farm isn't doing well. It's a very similar situation where the main characters are a young woman and her mother figure. But where Jann Alexander was inspired by her study of Texas history and the Dust Bowl and Black Sunday in particular, Hazel Gaynor was inspired by our culture, one of our culture's favorite movies, Wizard of Oz. Now, Hazel lives in Ireland, and she's fascinated by Irish folklore and fairy tales, which were the inspiration. Now, follow me on this long chain, will you? She's fascinated by Irish fairy tales, which were also the inspiration for Frank L. Baum's story, the book, The Wizard of Oz, which was written in 1900, 126 years ago. That book was the inspiration for the movie we all love by the same name, The Wizard of Oz, which was released in 1938. And of course, it puts, just as Baum put a twist on the Irish folk tales, the movie put a twist on his story. But then we take that book, and there's a whole canon of storytelling that goes along with it, right? We not only have Judy Garland playing Dorothy in the movie, but we have in the 1970s, we get the musical, the Broadway musical, The Wiz, and then that's followed by a movie. And then in the 1990s, we get Wicked, the novel, which is Elphaba, the Wicked Witch of the West, telling her story. And then in the last 2 or 3 years, we have gotten Wicked Part 1 and Wicked for Good. So there's a long history of taking these things, this original story, and tweaking it in different ways. So that's what we have going on here. Instead of being the story of Dorothy's dream, right? Remember, because in the movie, we only see her at home in Kansas for a few minutes, and then at the end, she wakes up. Everything in that movie is a dream. This is the story of the girl who is a dreamer, who has a lot of dreams. It's the story of Auntie Em and Uncle Henry on their farm in Kansas, and how they come to adopt their orphaned niece, Dorothy Gale, and how, because of the tragedy that she experienced with the loss of her parents and a bunch of other things, she has all these dreams. But 99% of the book is set on the farm in real life. But one of the fun things about this book is the author basically turns it into a scavenger hunt, and scattered throughout the chapters are Easter eggs. So we see the characters from the dream we're all familiar with in the book. You know how in the movie we see that the faces of the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and the Wizard were really inspired by people who lived on and around the farm? Well, in the book, we see the things that remind us of the movie. So it's super fun. The two families, the family in North Texas, Ruby Lee's family, and the family in Kansas, Dorothy's family, make different decisions about the environmental disaster that they're in the middle of. They're in the middle of this dust bowl with these dust storms that are killing people and burying crops and making farms worthless. What do? Do you stick it out? Do you leave? Do you stick it out for a while and then leave? And you leave right away? Do you stick it out to the end? And they each make different decisions about that, and it really impacts the destiny of those people. Anyway, I think you'll really enjoy them both. I want to read some reviews because I think it's helpful. Don't just take my word for it, right? So, for Unspoken, Jann Alexander's book, we get, it grabs your heart and doesn't let go. Ruby Lee Becker's silence is louder than any storm. There's grit and grace here. That was by the Historical Novels Review, so it's high acclaim. Another says, blazingly alive novel asks how we keep a family intact. And an historian and a commentator for NPR in Texas writes, it reminds me in tone of Texas classic literature. I loved it. Alexander is a great new talent in the genre of Texana. And apparently, being from California, I had to look up what is Texana. But it's that fascination with and study of everything Texas, especially the women folk. Okay, and let me read some about Hazel Gaynor's book also. So this is about Before Dorothy. A story as glimmering as the Emerald City and as hopeful as Dorothy herself. Hazel Gaynor's latest is an important and enchanting addition to the canon of Oz. Or Gaynor pulls Auntie Em out of a black and white background and into a full color world all her own. And In Technicolor prose, Hazel Gaynor gives new meaning to the familiar phrase, "There's no place like home." So, I heartily recommend both books, Unspoken by Jann Alexander and Before Dorothy by Hazel Gaynor. Now, I often give recommendations for what you might do with a book club here. And my book club likes to do meals, potlucks that are coordinated with books. I had a tough time thinking about, what would I want to eat that they were eating in the poverty of the Dust Bowl? And I was like, maybe what we should do is what was living on those farms like before the Dust Bowl started. Because it was, these were lands that were open to people who were eager to have their own land and their own farming, and they got all this acreage and they put in this wheat and they grew their own gardens, and meat and fresh vegetables were prolific. So that whole farm to fork kind of idea might be a good thing, but then a little tasting tray of what would they have eaten. Now, my own mom lived through the Depression in great poverty, and probably some of you listeners have parents or grandparents who did the same. In fact, one of my aunts came to California during the Dust Bowl from Arkansas. Anyway, my mom always talks about eating onion sandwiches, white bread, mayonnaise, and thick slices of onion. That was it. So I think you could look those things up and find what might they have eaten and make little samplings. I would not want to serve my book club big onion sandwiches, but a square of an onion sandwich, like a little petit four or something of an onion sandwich and some other things like that would be fun. Biscuits. They made biscuits out of essentially flour and water. Anyway, I think you could do that. And I was thinking about the clothing too. We don't have flour sacks to make dresses out of like they did back then, but that idea of gingham and denim, maybe things that are a little worn and tired, things maybe you could get at the Goodwill or the back of your closet, the things you just don't want to throw away because they were your favorite blue jeans 40 years ago, right? Those kinds of things would be particularly fun. Let me look at my list and see what I have completely forgotten. Oh, I know. Both of these authors on their websites have a whole section for book clubs where they provide discussion questions and further information, which I think is quite valuable to book clubs or just to the casual reader who wants to think about what would you discuss. Jann Alexander, even on her website, offers to come visit with your book club, either in person or via Zoom. Both of these authors refer to their stories as adventures. Even though at first glance, I think historical fiction in a time period, I don't necessarily think adventure, but I think that's a really good discussion question to have. How is this an adventure? Is it an internal adventure? Is it actually an external adventure? What makes something an adventure? Is it that it's a challenge and requires that you step out of your comfort zone, whether you're actually traveling or not? What makes an adventure? I thought that was a really interesting question. And the other thing is both of these are based around families and the bonds that hold families together. And I think talking about that would be very interesting. Ruby Lee's family in Unspoken starts bonded and together, but they fracture under pressure. Dorothy Gale's family starts kind of scattered between Kansas and Chicago, and under pressure they congeal. What's different? Why? Why? And then why do they make these different decisions? So I think they're a really good pair of books. Now, my book club has already read Before Dorothy and loved it, and we talked about it at length. But the next time my book club sits down to choose the next several books, I'm going to bring Unspoken to the table because I think it would be really interesting to pair it with the book we've already read and talk about those differences. So I would encourage your book club to read them both and compare them. And because there's such a canon of literature out there about the Dust Bowl, I mean, I'd be surprised if Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath didn't come up, or Photographs by Dorothea Lange didn't come up in the conversation. Maybe even Woody Guthrie's music, or Kristen Hanna's recent book, The Four Winds. There's so much out there about that period because it's so fascinating. So, the two books I shared today were Before Dorothy by Hazel Gaynor and Unspoken by Jann Alexander. But I also want to share a moment my own book, which is definitely an adventure book. It's Force of Nature, 3 Women Tackle the John Muir Trail. And I hope you'll look it up. It is definitely a reading adventure, an armchair adventure. So I want to thank you for being here, and I want to invite you back next time, and I will talk about more books from my Earth Month list of 30 books that I pick out every April and begin to share with you here. You can go to my website at joangriffin.us and you'll find the entire list and more information about these books and all the other books that I have already talked about, and get a hint of what I am going to talk about. See you next time. This has been Reading in the Wild.